The hospital cafeteria smelled like burned coffee and antiseptic when Grace Keller walked in at 2 in the morning, exhausted from a 12-hour shift in the emergency room, and accidentally spilled her entire cup of lukewarm coffee down the front of a man in an expensive suit who looked completely out of place among the tired medical staff and worried families. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Grace grabbed napkins from the nearest table, her cheeks burning with embarrassment as she dabbed uselessly at the spreading stain on his white shirt. The man looked down at his ruined clothing, then back up at her with surprisingly calm gray eyes. "It's fine. Really." "It's not fine. That shirt probably costs more than my monthly rent." Grace kept apologizing, her words tumbling over each other in her fatigue. "I just finished a really long shift and I wasn't looking where I was going. You're a nurse." He gestured to her scrubs, which were decorated with cartoon stethoscopes. "Yes. Well, technically a nurse practitioner now. I just got certified." She finally stopped dabbing at his shirt when she realized she was probably making it worse. "I'm Grace. Harrison Sawyer." He held out his hand and she shook it automatically, noticing how warm and solid his grip felt. "And honestly, don't worry about the shirt. I have others." "Harrison Sawyer." Grace repeated the name slowly, her tired brain trying to place why it sounded familiar. Then it hit her. "Wait. Harrison Sawyer. As in Sawyer Medical Technologies." He nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "That's me." Grace felt her embarrassment multiply. Sawyer Medical Technologies supplied half the equipment in this hospital. The company had revolutionized diagnostic imaging over the past decade, and Harrison Sawyer was the 32-year-old CEO who had inherited the company from his father, and somehow made it even more successful. She saw his face occasionally in medical journals and business magazines left in the break room. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Grace asked, then immediately regretted how nosy that sounded. "Sorry, that's none of my business. My mother had a fall. She's upstairs recovering from hip surgery." Harrison's expression softened. "I've been here most of the day, but I needed a break from my father's hovering." "I'm sorry about your mother. Hip replacements are tough, but the recovery rate is excellent if she follows physical therapy." Grace's professional instincts kicked in despite her exhaustion. "That's good to hear." Harrison smiled at her, and she noticed how it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Since you destroyed my shirt, the least you could do is let me buy you another coffee. A fresh one." Grace laughed despite herself. "You're the millionaire and I ruined your clothes. I should be buying you coffee. How about we both just get coffee and call it even?" They ended up sitting in the empty cafeteria for an hour, talking about everything except his wealth or her exhaustion. Harrison told her about visiting his mother every day, about how his father refused to leave her side, about his younger sister who was flying in from California the next morning. Grace found herself telling him about the patients she'd seen that day, the victories and the heartbreaks that came with emergency medicine. "Why emergency?" Harrison asked, genuine curiosity in his eyes. "Because that's where I can make the most immediate difference. Someone comes in scared and hurting and I can help them right then. No waiting, no wondering, just action." Grace stirred her third coffee of the conversation. "My dad died when I was 16. Heart attack. He kept saying he felt fine, kept putting off going to the doctor. By the time we got him to the ER, it was too late. I think some part of me has been trying to save him ever since." Harrison reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." Grace smiled softly. "My mom worked 3 jobs to keep me and my brother afloat. She cleaned houses during the day, worked retail in the evenings, and did data entry from home at night. She made sure I could go to college, made sure I had every opportunity she never got. That's why I do this. For her, for my dad, for everyone who needs someone to care." "That's remarkable," Harrison said quietly. "What about you? Why medical technology?" Grace asked. "My father built that company from nothing. He started in his garage, creating better hospital beds because my grandmother complained about how uncomfortable they were during her cancer treatment. He wanted to make a difference, and he did. When he retired and handed everything to me, I felt this massive pressure to live up to what he'd built. But somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just continuing his legacy. I was creating my own." They talked until Grace's phone alarm went off, reminding her she needed to get home and sleep before her next shift. Harrison walked her to the parking lot despite her protests. "Thank you for the coffee and conversation," Grace said, digging in her bag for her keys. "I needed that more than I realized." "Can I see you again?" Harrison asked, his confident businessman demeanor slipping into something more vulnerable. "Outside the hospital. Maybe somewhere without terrible coffee." Grace hesitated. She'd dated before, but work always got in the way. 12-hour shifts, rotating schedules, the emotional exhaustion that came with emergency medicine. Most guys lost interest after a few canceled dates. And Harrison Sawyer wasn't just any guy. He was wealthy, successful, probably had women throwing themselves at him constantly. "I work crazy hours," she warned him. "So do I," he countered. "I'm serious. Sometimes I get called in on my days off. Sometimes I'm too tired to do anything but sleep." "Grace." Harrison stepped closer, his gray eyes steady on hers. "I just spent an hour talking to you about everything from hospital food to childhood dreams, and I haven't once looked at my phone or thought about work. That hasn't happened in years. So yes, I know you work crazy hours. I still want to see you again." Grace felt something warm bloom in her chest. "Okay. Yes." They exchanged numbers, and Harrison waited until she was safely in her car before walking back toward the hospital. Grace drove home with a smile on her face, too wired from the unexpected encounter to feel her earlier exhaustion. Their first official date was 3 days later at a small Italian restaurant far from the business district, where Harrison might be recognized. He showed up in jeans and a dark sweater, looking more relaxed than he had in the hospital. "No suit," Grace teased, smoothing down her simple blue dress. "I figured I should save my expensive clothes around you," Harrison shot back, his eyes warm with amusement. Dinner was easy, comfortable, like they'd known each other for years instead of days. Harrison told her about growing up with pressure to be perfect, about his father's expectations and his own drive to prove himself. Grace shared stories about her chaotic childhood, about her brother Marcus, who was now teaching high school English, about her mother who had finally retired and spent her days volunteering at the local library. "I'd like to meet her someday," Harrison said. "She sounds incredible." "She'd probably try to feed you too much and ask about your intentions," Grace laughed. "Fair warning. My family's not that laid back. My father interrogates anyone I bring around. My sister judges silently but thoroughly. And my mother has very specific ideas about who would make a suitable match for her son." Harrison's expression turned serious. "They can be difficult." "Are you warning me away?" Grace asked lightly, though something in his tone made her nervous. "No, just being honest. My family has expectations. Old money rules. The right schools, the right connections, the right everything." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But I stopped living just for their approval a long time ago." They went on more dates over the next several weeks, coffee between shifts, late dinners after long workdays. A Sunday morning at the farmer's market where Harrison bought ridiculous amounts of fresh produce, and Grace teased him about his inability to bargain. Movies where they held hands in the dark. long walks through the city where they talked about everything and nothing. Grace found herself falling for him in ways that terrified and thrilled her. Harrison was different from anyone she dated before. He was confident but not arrogant, successful but not defined by his wealth, driven but capable of being present in the moment. He remembered details she mentioned in passing, showed up with her favorite tea when she was sick, and never made her feel guilty about her demanding schedule. 2 months into dating, Harrison invited her to a charity gala his company was sponsoring. Grace almost said no, intimidated by the idea of his world, but something in his hopeful expression made her agree. She bought a simple black dress on sale and felt completely out of her depth when Harrison picked her up looking devastating in a tuxedo. The gala was held in a historic hotel downtown, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors and people wearing jewelry worth more than Grace's annual salary. "You look beautiful," Harrison murmured as they entered the ballroom. "I look like I'm playing dress up," Grace whispered back, watching elegant couples glide across the dance floor. "You look perfect. Trust me." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. The evening started well enough. Harrison introduced her to various colleagues and business associates, his hand steady on her lower back. Grace smiled and made polite conversation, drawing on years of patient interaction to navigate the social dynamics. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, evaluated, found wanting. "Harrison." A cold voice cut through their conversation with a hospital administrator. Grace turned to see an older couple approaching, the woman's pearls gleaming against her pale throat, the man's posture radiating wealth and authority. "Father, mother." Harrison's shoulders tensed slightly. "Grace, these are my parents, Richard and Catherine Sawyer. This is Grace Keller. How lovely to meet you." Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked Grace up and down with obvious assessment. "Harrison mentioned he was bringing someone. What is it your family does, dear?" Grace felt the trap in the question immediately. "My mother worked several jobs to support our family. She's retired now. My father passed away when I was young." "Oh." Catherine's expression became pitying in a way that made Grace's spine stiffen. "And what do you do?" "I'm a nurse practitioner. I work in emergency medicine at Metropolitan Hospital." "How noble." Richard's tone suggested it was anything but. "Harrison, I need to speak with you about the Peterson merger. Alone." "Later, Father." Harrison's voice was firm. "I'm here with Grace tonight. It will only take a moment." Richard's expression hardened. "Unless you've forgotten that this gala is primarily a business function." Harrison looked torn and Grace gently touched his arm. "It's fine. Go talk business. I'll be here." He kissed her temple quickly before walking away with his father, leaving Grace alone with Catherine. The older woman studied her with calculating blue eyes. "You seem like a nice girl," Catherine began, her voice deceptively kind. "But surely you can see that you're not right for Harrison." Grace felt her stomach drop, but she kept her voice steady. "I care about your son very much." "I'm sure you do. But caring isn't enough, dear. Harrison needs someone from his world, someone who understands the demands of his position, the expectations of our family. Someone with the right background, the right connections." Catherine sipped her champagne delicately. "Someone whose mother didn't clean houses for a living." The words were designed to wound, and they hit their mark. Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "My mother worked hard to give me and my brother a good life. I'm proud of her." "As you should be. But that doesn't change reality. You're a nurse. Harrison is a CEO worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His world includes board meetings and international travel, galas and connections that shape industries. Can you honestly say you belong in that world?" Catherine leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Can you honestly say you wouldn't hold him back?" What's going on here? Harrison's sister appeared beside them, a tall woman with her brother's gray eyes and a sharper edge. She looked between them with obvious interest. "Mother, are you interrogating Harrison's date?" "We were just getting acquainted, Helen," Catherine said smoothly. "Right." Helen turned to Grace with a slightly warmer expression. "I'm Helen Sawyer. You must be Grace. Harrison's mentioned you." "Nothing good, I'm sure." Grace tried to joke, but it came out strained. "Actually, he talks about you constantly. It's annoying." Helen's slight smile suggested she didn't actually find it annoying at all. "Come on, let's get you away from the maternal inquisition and find the good appetizers." Grace followed Helen gratefully, leaving Catherine watching them with disapproval. Helen led her to a quieter corner of the ballroom and grabbed 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter. "Don't let Mother get to you. She's protective of Harrison to the point of being overbearing. She had his whole life planned out before he could walk, and he spent the past decade systematically disappointing her expectations." "She doesn't think I'm good enough for him," Grace said quietly. "She doesn't think anyone is good enough for him. Trust me, I've watched her chase away perfectly lovely women for years. The last one was a lawyer from a prominent family, and Mother still found fault with her." Helen studied Grace thoughtfully. "But you're the first one Harrison's looked at the way he looks at you." "What way?" "Like you matter more than the company, more than Father's approval, more than the perfect image we're all supposed to maintain." Helen's expression softened. "Like you're something real in a world full of carefully constructed facades." Before Grace could respond, Harrison appeared, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. "We're leaving." "What happened?" Grace asked. "My father happened. Come on." He took her hand and led her toward the exit, ignoring his mother's protests and the curious looks from other guests. They didn't speak until they were in Harrison's car, driving through the city streets. Grace watched the lights blur past, her mind replaying Catherine's words over and over. "I'm sorry," Harrison finally said, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "My father spent 15 minutes explaining why you're unsuitable. Wrong background, wrong connections, wrong profession. Then my mother joined in with her concerns about my future and the family legacy." "They're not wrong," Grace said quietly. "We're from completely different worlds. Don't." Harrison pulled the car over abruptly, parking on a side street. He turned to face her, his gray eyes intense. "Don't let them make you doubt this. Doubt us." "Harrison, I wore a sale dress to a gala where women were wearing designer gowns. Your mother asked what my family does like it was a test I was destined to fail. Your father thinks I'm unsuitable. How is this supposed to work? It works because I want it to work. Because when I'm with you, I feel like myself instead of the heir to the Sawyer legacy. Because you make me laugh and challenge me and don't care about my money or my connections." He cupped her face gently. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Grace." Her breath caught. They'd been dating for 2 months, and she'd felt it growing between them, but hearing him say it out loud made it real and terrifying. "Your family will never accept me. Then they'll have to deal with being disappointed. I've spent my entire life trying to live up to their expectations. I'm not giving up the best thing that's ever happened to me because they can't see past their outdated ideas about class and status." "This is easy to say now," Grace whispered. "But what about later, when your father pressures you about business decisions? When your mother refuses to acknowledge me? When you realize that being with me means constant conflict with your family? Then we'll handle it, together." Harrison kissed her softly. "I love you. That's not going to change because my parents are snobs." Grace kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and love into it. "I love you too. I'm just scared. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." They sat in the car for a long time, holding each other, the city moving around them. Eventually, Harrison drove Grace back to her apartment, a modest place she shared with a rotating cast of roommates who also worked at the hospital. "This is me," she said unnecessarily as he walked her to the door. "I know. I've dropped you off before." Harrison smiled, but it faded quickly. "Grace, I meant what I said. I'm not letting my family ruin this." "Okay," she said, because what else could she say? She believed he meant it now, but she'd seen enough of the world to know that good intentions didn't always survive reality. The next few weeks were strained. Harrison's parents made their disapproval abundantly clear through pointed comments and not so subtle pressure. Richard called constantly with business emergencies that required Harrison's immediate attention. Catherine staged family dinners and events on days she knew Grace had off, clearly trying to force Harrison to choose between his family and his relationship. Grace threw herself into work, picking up extra shifts and staying late to avoid thinking about the growing tension. Her mother noticed during their weekly phone call. "You sound tired, honey," Linda Keller said, concern evident in her voice. "Just busy at work," Grace deflected. "Is this about that man you mentioned, Harrison?" Grace had told her mother about Harrison early on, carefully editing out details about his wealth. Linda knew he worked in medical technology, that he was kind and thoughtful, that Grace really liked him. She didn't know about the millions or the family drama. "His parents don't approve of me," Grace admitted. "They think I'm not good enough for him." "Well, that's ridiculous. You're a wonderful woman with a good heart and a solid career. Anyone would be lucky to have you." Linda's voice turned fierce in the way only mothers could manage. "If they can't see that, then they're fools. It's more complicated than that, Mom. Is he worth fighting for?" Grace thought about Harrison's laugh, the way he held her hand, how he looked at her like she was the most important person in his world. "Yes. Then fight. Don't let anyone make you feel small, Grace. Your father and I raised you better than that." The conversation bolstered Grace's resolve, but it was tested again a week later when she agreed to have dinner at the Sawyer family home. Harrison insisted it would help his parents see how wrong they were about her, but Grace suspected it would just be another opportunity for criticism. The Sawyer mansion was exactly what Grace expected: sprawling, elegant, intimidating. A butler actually answered the door. A butler. Grace caught Harrison's eye and saw him wince slightly at her expression. "It's just a house," he murmured as they walked inside. "Harrison, there's a chandelier in the entryway bigger than my entire living room." Dinner was held in a formal dining room with a table that could seat 20 people. Grace sat next to Harrison, across from Helen, who at least offered a sympathetic smile. Richard and Catherine held court at the head of the table, steering conversation toward business matters and family history that deliberately excluded Grace. "The Peterson merger is moving forward," Richard announced. "We'll need you in London next month for the final negotiations, Harrison." "I can probably make that work," Harrison replied carefully. "Probably," Catherine raised an eyebrow. "This is a multi-million-dollar deal. It takes priority." "I'm aware, Mother. I just need to check my schedule." "Surely your schedule is flexible enough for business." Richard's tone was pointed. "Unless you've allowed personal distractions to interfere with professional obligations." Grace felt everyone's eyes on her. She kept her gaze on her plate, pushing expensive food around with her fork. "My personal life is not a distraction," Harrison said firmly, "and I've never let it interfere with business." "Yet you're hesitating about London," Catherine observed. "That's not like you, dear." "Maybe I'm tired of dropping everything because you deem something a priority," Harrison shot back. "I run the company now, not Father. I'm capable of making my own decisions about what requires my immediate attention." The tension at the table became thick enough to cut. Helen cleared her throat awkwardly. "So, Grace, Harrison mentioned you work in emergency medicine. That must be intense." "It has its moments," Grace said, grateful for the subject change. "But it's rewarding. Knowing you made a difference in someone's worst moment makes the long hours worthwhile." "How admirable," Catherine said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Though I imagine the salary leaves much to be desired. Emergency nursing can't pay very well." "I do fine," Grace replied evenly, though her cheeks burned. "Of course, fine is relative, isn't it? What Harrison considers fine and what you consider fine are likely very different." Catherine smiled coldly. "I'm sure you can understand our concern about your relationship. The disparity in your situations is quite pronounced." "Mother," Helen warned. "I'm simply being practical, Helen. Grace seems like a perfectly nice girl, but she's not right for Harrison. Surely she can see that." Grace set down her fork carefully. "With all due respect, Mrs. Sawyer, I think Harrison is capable of deciding who's right for him." "Is he?" "Because from where I'm sitting, he seems rather blinded by infatuation. He's neglecting family obligations, questioning business decisions, and generally behaving unlike himself. That doesn't suggest sound judgment." Catherine leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Grace, what exactly do you bring to this relationship? Beyond the obvious appeal of Harrison's wealth." "I'm not interested in his money," Grace said quietly, her voice shaking slightly with suppressed anger. "Everyone is interested in money, dear, especially people who don't have it." "That's enough." Harrison stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Grace, we're leaving." "Harrison, sit down," Richard commanded. "We're having a family discussion." "No, you're attacking the woman I love. That's not a discussion, it's cruelty." Harrison held out his hand to Grace. "Come on." Grace took his hand and stood, her legs shaky but her spine straight. Helen stood as well. "I'll walk you out." They left Richard and Catherine sitting at the table, Catherine looking furious and Richard appearing carved from stone. Helen walked them to the front door, her expression troubled. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "They've always been controlling, but this is excessive even for them." "They're scared," Grace said suddenly, the realization hitting her. "They're scared of losing him." Helen looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Maybe, but that doesn't excuse their behavior." "No, it doesn't," Harrison agreed. "Grace, I'm so sorry. I thought maybe if they spent time with you they'd see what I see. I was wrong." "You weren't wrong to try." Grace squeezed his hand. "But I think we need to accept that your parents aren't going to change their minds anytime soon." They drove back to Grace's apartment in heavy silence. Harrison walked her to the door like always, but something felt different, heavier, more final. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked, searching his face in the dim porch light. "I'm thinking that I hate how my parents made you feel tonight. I'm thinking that I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. I'm thinking that I don't know how to fix this." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But I'm not giving up on us, Grace. I need you to know that." "I know. I'm not giving up either." She kissed him softly. "But this is going to get harder before it gets easier." "I know." It did get harder. Richard started making veiled threats about Harrison's position in the company. Catherine spread rumors through her social circle about the inappropriate relationship her son was pursuing. Helen called regularly to update Harrison on their parents' latest schemes, her voice tight with frustration on her brother's behalf. Work became Grace's refuge. In the ER, things were clear. Someone needed help, and she provided it. Success or failure was measured in vital signs and recovery rates, not social status or family approval. She worked longer hours, taking on extra shifts until her supervisor pulled her aside with concern. "You're pushing yourself too hard, doctor." Martinez said, studying Grace with the same intensity she used on patients. "What's going on?" "Just trying to stay busy," Grace deflected. "This is about more than staying busy. You're exhausted, Grace. You're going to burn out if you keep this pace." Dr. Martinez softened her tone. "Talk to me." Grace found herself pouring out the whole story. Harrison, the family disapproval, the constant pressure and criticism, her own doubts about whether love was enough to overcome such massive obstacles. "You love him?" Dr. Martinez asked when Grace finally fell silent. "Yes." "Does he love you?" "He says he does." "Do you believe him?" Grace thought about Harrison's steadiness, his refusal to let his parents' disapproval change his feelings, the way he looked at her like she was his whole world. "Yes, I believe him." "Then the only question that matters is whether you're willing to fight for it. Because it sounds like his family isn't going to make this easy. You need to decide if he's worth the battle." "He is," Grace said without hesitation, "but I don't know if I'm strong enough." "The Grace I know is plenty strong. You face life and death situations every shift. You make impossible decisions under pressure. You've built a career and a life from nothing because your mother taught you to fight for what matters." Dr. Martinez smiled. "So fight for this if it's what you want. Don't let some entitled rich people convince you that you're not worthy of love." The pep talk helped, but doubt crept back in during quiet moments. Grace found herself questioning everything. Could she really fit into Harrison's world? Was love enough to bridge the gap between their lives? What if his parents were right about her holding him back? Harrison sensed her pulling away emotionally, even though she tried to hide it. 3 weeks after the disastrous dinner, he showed up at her apartment unannounced with takeout and determination in his eyes. "We need to talk," he said, setting the food on her small kitchen counter. "That's never a good opening," Grace tried to joke, but it fell flat. "Grace, you're shutting me out. You work constantly, you barely return my calls, and when we're together you're somewhere else mentally. I need to know what's going on." Grace sank onto her worn couch, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know if I can do this, Harrison. Your parents hate me. Your father is threatening your job. Your mother is spreading rumors. This relationship is causing you nothing but problems." "You're not a problem." "My parents are the problem." Harrison sat beside her, taking her hands. "Grace, look at me. Do you still love me?" "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point. Do you love me?" "Yes," she whispered, "but maybe that's not enough." "It is enough. Everything else is just noise." He cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I don't care about my parents' approval. I don't care about society's expectations. I care about you. Only you. But you shouldn't have to choose between me and your family." "I'm not choosing between you and my family. I'm choosing to live my own life instead of the one they planned for me. There's a difference." Harrison kissed her forehead. "My parents are scared of losing control. My father built his entire identity around the company and passing it to me. My mother has spent decades cultivating a certain image for our family. You represent something they can't control or predict, and that terrifies them. So what do? We keep loving each other. We keep building our relationship regardless of their approval. And we trust that eventually they'll see what I see when I look at you. What if they don't? Then they miss out on knowing an incredible woman. Their loss." He smiled sadly. "Grace, I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect son, the perfect student, the perfect CEO. I'm tired of performing perfection. With you, I get to just be Harrison, not the Sawyer heir, not the company face, just me. That's worth more than my parents' approval." Grace leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "I love you. I'm just scared of not being enough." "You're more than enough. You're everything." They held each other as the takeout grew cold, finding strength in each other's presence. When Harrison finally left that night, Grace felt more centered than she had in weeks. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but at least they were walking it together. The next morning, Grace woke to 17 missed calls from Harrison. Her heart seized with panic as she called him back immediately. "What's wrong? Is your mother okay?" "She's fine. Everyone's fine." "Well, not fine exactly, but physically fine." Harrison sounded wired, almost manic. "Grace, I quit." "You what?" "I quit the company. Told my father he could either accept you or accept my resignation. He chose to dig in his heels, so I walked out." Grace felt her world tilt. "Harrison, you can't do that. That company is your entire life." "No, it was my father's life. I just inherited it. And you know what I realized last night after I left your place? I've spent 10 years running a company I inherited but never chose. I'm good at it, but I'm not passionate about it. Not the way I'm passionate about you." "But what are you going to do?" "I have no idea." "Isn't that exciting?" He laughed, and Grace realized he sounded lighter than she'd ever heard him. "I have money saved. I can figure out what I actually want to do instead of what I'm supposed to do. And I can do it without my parents holding the company over my head." "Your mother is going to kill you, probably." "Helen called me screaming, but I think she was more impressed than angry. My parents are furious, but that's nothing new." He paused. "Grace, I need you to understand something. I didn't do this to manipulate you or prove a point. I did it because I finally realized I've been living someone else's dream. I want to figure out my own dream, and I want you there while I do it." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "You're insane, maybe, but I'm happy. First time in years I can say that honestly." "I love you," she said, meaning it more than ever. "I love you too. Now I need to go deal with the fallout. Helen's threatening to break into my apartment if I don't call her back, and my mother has left 6 voicemails, but I wanted you to know first." After they hung up, Grace sat in her apartment, stunned by the turn of events. Harrison had walked away from everything his family expected because he refused to let them dictate his happiness. It was terrifying and romantic and completely insane. Her phone rang again. This time it was Helen. "Is my brother having a nervous breakdown?" Helen demanded without preamble. "I don't think so. He seems pretty happy, actually." "Happy? He quit the family company, Grace. Father is threatening to cut him off completely. Mother is having vapors. The board is in chaos, and he's happy." "Maybe that tells you something," Grace said quietly. Helen was silent for a long moment. "You really love him, don't you?" "Yes. And this wasn't some scheme to get him away from the family money, because he just gave that up, you realize. Father's serious about cutting him off." "I never wanted his money. I just wanted him." Grace felt her own resolve hardening. "Your parents have spent months trying to convince me I'm not good enough for Harrison, but maybe the real question is whether your family is good enough for him. He's kind and thoughtful and caring, and all you've done is try to control his life." "Ouch," Helen said, but she sounded more thoughtful than offended. "Fair point, though. We have been pretty horrible. Pretty horrible is understating it. Look, Grace, I'm going to be honest. I didn't think you were right for Harrison at first. You're from completely different worlds, and I thought it was just some phase he was going through. But then I watched my parents tear into you at that dinner, and I watched Harrison defend you without hesitation. And I realized he's never defended anything that fiercely before, not even the company." "Where are you going with this?" Grace asked warily. "I'm saying maybe I was wrong. Maybe you're exactly what Harrison needs. Someone who sees him as a person instead of a position. Someone worth fighting his entire family for." Helen sighed heavily. "I'm also saying I'm sorry for being part of the problem. I should have supported my brother instead of buying into mother and father's snobbery." "Thank you," Grace said, surprised by the apology. "Don't thank me yet. You're going to need backup dealing with my parents, and I'm volunteering. Someone needs to knock some sense into them before they lose Harrison completely. Over the next 2 months, things shifted gradually. Harrison threw himself into figuring out what he actually wanted to do with his life. He started consulting for smaller medical technology companies, using his expertise without the pressure of running the family empire. He volunteered at the hospital where Grace worked, seeing firsthand the impact of the equipment his former company provided. "I never really understood what our technology meant until I saw you use it to save someone's life," he told Grace one evening as they walked through the park near her apartment. "I was always so focused on profit margins and market share that I forgot the actual point was helping people." "So what are you going to do?" Grace asked, threading her fingers through his. "I'm thinking about starting my own company. Something smaller, more focused. Medical devices for underserved communities, maybe. Equipment that's affordable and accessible instead of just cutting edge and expensive." Harrison's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I've been talking to some engineers who are interested in developing low-cost diagnostic tools for rural clinics. It would be completely different from Sawyer Medical, but it feels right." "That sounds amazing," Grace said, meaning it. She'd never seen Harrison so animated about work before. "It probably won't make me as rich as the family company. Actually, it definitely won't. But I don't care about that anymore." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Grace, these past 2 months have been the best of my life. I wake up excited about what I'm doing. I'm not stressed constantly. I feel like I'm finally becoming who I'm supposed to be instead of who I was raised to be." "I'm proud of you," Grace said softly. "None of this would have happened without you. You made me brave enough to walk away from expectations and figure out what I actually want." They kissed in the fading light, and Grace felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not perfect or easy, but real and worth fighting for. Helen became an unexpected ally. She confronted their parents repeatedly about their treatment of Harrison and Grace, refusing to let them pretend everything was fine. She had lunch with Grace regularly, building a genuine friendship that surprised them both. "Mother is starting to crack," Helen reported over coffee one afternoon. "She keeps asking about Harrison, wanting to know if he's eating properly and taking care of himself. Father pretends he doesn't care, but he reads every article about Harrison's new consulting work." "Does that mean they're coming around?" Grace asked hopefully. "I don't know. They're stubborn and proud. Admitting they were wrong would require humility they're not accustomed to showing." Helen stirred her latte thoughtfully. "But I think they're starting to realize that cutting Harrison off completely means losing him entirely. That's a price they might not be willing to pay." The breaking point came 5 months after Harrison quit the company. Grace was working a night shift when a multi-vehicle accident brought in more than a dozen patients. The ER became controlled chaos, every staff member pushed to their limits. Grace moved from patient to patient, triaging injuries, calling orders, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. She was stabilizing a teenage boy with internal bleeding when someone called her name. She looked up to see Harrison standing in the doorway, his face pale with worry. "Not now," she barked, returning her attention to her patient. "Someone get him out of here." Harrison didn't leave. He stood back, staying out of the way but watching as Grace worked. She was vaguely aware of him during the next 3 hours as she fought to save lives, her scrubs becoming stained with blood, her body running on pure adrenaline and determination. When the chaos finally calmed and all patients were either stabilized or sent to surgery, Grace found Harrison still waiting. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out and barely holding herself together. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "I'm a mess," Grace corrected, looking down at her stained scrubs. "Why are you here?" Helen called. There was a news report about the accident and she was worried. I needed to see that you were okay." He stepped closer, not seeming to care about the blood and antiseptic smell. "Grace, watching you work tonight, seeing you save those people, I've never been more in awe of anyone in my life." Grace felt tears threaten. "I lost 2 of them. They died before we could get them to surgery. And you saved 11 others. You're a hero." "I'm just doing my job." "No, you're doing something extraordinary, and I need my parents to see that. I need them to understand who you are and what you do and why I love you more than anything." Harrison took her hands gently. "Come to dinner with me, at my parents' house. Let me show them." "Harrison, I look terrible." "I smell terrible. I'm not up for another battle with your family." "Not a battle. A truce. Please, Grace, trust me." She was too tired to argue, so she agreed. Harrison drove her to his parents' mansion, the same one where she'd endured that horrible dinner months ago. Grace felt trepidation build as they approached, but Harrison squeezed her hand reassuringly. A maid answered the door, looking surprised to see them. "Mr. Sawyer, we weren't expecting you." "Is my family here?" "In the sitting room, sir." Harrison led Grace through the mansion to a formal sitting room where Richard, Catherine, and Helen sat with after-dinner drinks. They all looked up in surprise. "Harrison," Catherine began, then stopped when she saw Grace. "Good Lord, what happened?" Grace just worked a 3-hour emergency with mass casualties from a major accident. She saved 11 lives tonight. Harrison's voice rang with pride and challenge. "I brought her here because I need you to see what I see, not some unsuitable woman from the wrong background. A brilliant medical professional who dedicates her life to helping others." Grace wanted to disappear. She was covered in blood and exhaustion, standing in an elegant sitting room while Harrison's parents stared at her like she was an alien. 11 lives, Helen said quietly, breaking the silence. "That's extraordinary." "It's my job," Grace said, using her last reserves of energy to stand straight. "It's what I was trained to do, but yes, tonight was hard. We lost 2 patients and that hurts. We always lose some, no matter how hard we fight. But the 11 who survived, who get to go home to their families, make the hard nights worthwhile." Catherine stood slowly, studying Grace with an unreadable expression. "You're bleeding." Grace looked down and realized she'd scraped her arm at some point during the chaos. "It's nothing." "Just a scratch. Helen, get the first aid kit." Catherine moved closer and Grace instinctively tensed. But instead of criticism or coldness, Catherine's face showed something almost like concern. "Sit down, dear. You look ready to collapse." Grace sat in a chair that probably cost more than her car, too tired to protest as Catherine cleaned and bandaged her arm with surprising gentleness. Richard watched from his chair, his expression troubled. 11 lives, he said finally. "In one night." "It was a good night," Grace replied. "Sometimes we can't save anyone. Those nights are the worst." "How do you handle that?" Richard asked, and he sounded genuinely curious rather than condescending. "I remember that I did everything I could. That medicine isn't perfect, and neither am I. That the people I do save matter just as much as the ones I lose." Grace looked directly at him. "I know you think I'm not good enough for Harrison, that I don't have the right background or connections. But I love your son with everything I have, and he makes me want to be better every single day. I make him happy. That should count for something." Catherine finished bandaging Grace's arm and sat back. "You're right. It should count for something." "Mother," Harrison looked shocked. "Don't look so surprised, Harrison. I may be set in my ways, but I'm not completely heartless." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "Grace, you need to understand. When you're a parent, you want the best for your children. You want to protect them from pain and struggle. When Richard and I saw you with Harrison, all we could see was someone who might hurt him or take advantage of his position. I would never hurt him, Grace said fiercely. I'm beginning to believe that, but it's difficult to let go of expectations we've held for decades. We imagined Harrison marrying someone from our world, someone who understood the demands of wealth and society. We never imagined someone like you, someone who has built a meaningful life through dedication and hard work rather than inheritance. Catherine looked at Richard, who nodded slowly. We've been unfair to you. We judged you without knowing you, and we pressured our son into an impossible choice between his family and his happiness. You've been more than unfair, Helen interjected. You've been cruel. Yes, Catherine agreed quietly. We have been, and I apologize, Grace. Watching you stand here exhausted from saving lives, hearing the passion in your voice when you talk about your work, I realize that Harrison was right. You're not unsuitable. You're remarkable, and we've been too blind and proud to see it. Grace felt tears finally spill over, her exhaustion and the emotional weight of the past months catching up to her. Harrison moved immediately to her side, pulling her against him. It's okay, he murmured. You're okay. Mr. and Mrs. Sawyer, Grace said through tears. I love your son. I don't care about his money or his name. I care that he's kind and thoughtful and brave. I care that he makes me laugh and supports my dreams and sees me as an equal partner. That's all I've ever wanted. Richard stood and crossed the room, extending his hand to Grace. She took it hesitantly, and he shook it firmly. My son quit a multi-million-dollar company to be with you. He walked away from everything we built because we couldn't see what he saw in you. I've spent 5 months being angry about that decision, but tonight I finally understand it. You're worth fighting for. We have a lot of rebuilding to do, Catherine added. Trust doesn't return overnight, and I'm sure you have every reason to keep your guard up around us, but I'd like to try if you're willing. I'd like to know the woman my son loves enough to change his entire life for. Grace looked at Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. I'm willing to try, she said softly. The evening that followed was surreal. Catherine ordered food sent in, insisting that Grace needed to eat after her shift. Helen regaled them with stories about the chaos at Sawyer Medical Technologies since Harrison left, the family finally able to laugh together. Richard asked intelligent questions about emergency medicine, seeming genuinely interested in understanding Grace's work. It wasn't perfect, and there was still awkwardness, but it felt like a beginning. When Harrison finally drove Grace home as the sun was rising, she felt lighter than she had in months. Did that really just happen? She asked, her head leaning against the car window. It really did. My parents apologized. Helen threatened to disown them if they backslid, and you were magnificent. Harrison reached over and took her hand. I'm so proud of you, Grace. The way you handled tonight, both at the hospital and with my family, you were incredible. I was too tired to be anything but honest. Maybe that's what they needed. No performance, no trying to fit their expectations. Just you, exactly as you are. They sat in Grace's parking lot as the city woke up around them. What happens now? Grace asked. Now we keep building our life together. My parents are trying, which is more than I expected. My new company is taking shape. You're saving lives and being amazing. We figure it out as we go. Harrison smiled. That's enough for me. Me too, Grace agreed. The next several months proved that Catherine and Richard were serious about changing. They invited Grace and Harrison to family dinners where conversations were genuine rather than interrogations. Catherine asked Grace about her work with actual interest, even donating a significant sum to the hospital's emergency department in Grace's name. Richard attended a charity benefit Harrison organized for his new company, showing his support publicly. Helen became one of Grace's closest friends, the two women bonding over their determination to keep the Sawyer family dynamics healthy. They had lunch regularly, vented about their respective jobs, and ganged up on Harrison when he got too intense about his new business venture. Harrison's company, which he named Accessible Medical Solutions, began developing its first product, a portable diagnostic device for use in areas without easy access to hospitals. He worked with passion Grace had never seen in him before, driven by purpose rather than obligation. "We're going to change things," he told Grace one evening as they cooked dinner together in her apartment. "Make healthcare technology available to communities that have been ignored by companies like my father's." "You're amazing," Grace said, kissing him as he stirred pasta sauce. "Have I mentioned that lately?" "Not in the past hour. I was getting worried." They laughed together, comfortable in the small domestic routine they'd built. Grace loved these quiet moments as much as the grand gestures. The way Harrison knew how she liked her coffee, how he rubbed her feet after long shifts, how he listened when she needed to debrief about difficult cases. One evening, nearly a year after that horrible family dinner, Harrison suggested a walk through the same park where they'd spent so many evenings talking about their future. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under their feet. "I love this time of year," Grace said, breathing deeply. "Everything changing but still beautiful." "Change can be beautiful," Harrison agreed. "This year has been full of change, good change." "The best change," Grace confirmed. "Your company is taking off. My promotion came through. Your parents actually smile at me now instead of looking like they've bitten into lemons." Harrison laughed. "They more than smile at you. My mother called yesterday asking for your opinion on a hospital charity event she's planning. She values your input. That's still weird to me." "You're part of the family now. Get used to weird Sawyer dynamics." Harrison stopped walking, turning to face her in the fading light. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that, the family part." Grace's heart began to race. "Okay." "Grace Keller, this year with you has been the best of my life. You challenged me to be authentic instead of perfect. You showed me what real love looks like, the kind that doesn't demand you change who you are but celebrates you exactly as you are. You made me brave enough to walk away from expectations and find my own path." Harrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "And I want to spend the rest of my life being brave with you. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, the diamond catching the sunset light. But Grace barely saw it. She was too busy looking at Harrison's face, at the hope and love and certainty in his eyes. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Harrison slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as the sun set behind them. Grace felt like her heart might burst with happiness. A year ago she'd been terrified that love wouldn't be enough to overcome the obstacles they faced. Now those obstacles seemed small in comparison to what they'd built together. "Should we call your parents?" Grace asked when they finally broke apart. "Already done. I asked their blessing last week. Mother cried. Father actually hugged me. It was very emotional." Harrison grinned. "Helen knew too. She helped me pick the ring." "You all conspired without me." "It's called a surprise, Grace. That's generally how proposals work." Grace laughed, giddy with joy. They walked back to her apartment hand in hand, calling their families with the news. Linda Keller cried and demanded to meet Harrison's parents immediately. Marcus, Grace's brother, threatened Harrison with bodily harm if he ever made Grace cry, then congratulated them both. Helen screamed so loudly they had to hold the phone away from their ears. The engagement party was held at the Sawyer mansion 2 weeks later. Catherine planned everything with military precision, but included Grace in every decision. The result was elegant but warm, filled with people from both their worlds. Grace's nurse friends mixed with Harrison's business colleagues. Linda charmed Richard with stories about Grace's childhood determination. Marcus debated medical ethics with Catherine, both of them enjoying the intellectual sparring. "This is perfect," Grace told Harrison as they danced together in the ballroom where she'd once felt so out of place. "You're perfect," he corrected. "I'm just the lucky guy who convinced you to love me." "I think I'm the lucky one. You walked away from everything for me." "No, I walked away from everything that didn't matter so I could have everything that does." Harrison pulled her closer. "Big difference." They married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended both families beautifully. Grace wore a dress Catherine helped her pick out, simple but elegant. Harrison cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. The vows they exchanged were personal and heartfelt, promises to continue choosing each other every day. Linda and Catherine sat together in the front row, having formed an unlikely friendship based on mutual love for their children. Richard walked Grace down the aisle alongside Marcus, both men taking their roles seriously. Helen stood as Grace's maid of honor, having gone from skeptic to supporter to genuine friend. The reception was held in the same park where Harrison had proposed, everything decorated with fairy lights and autumn flowers. People danced and laughed and celebrated two people who'd fought for their love against impossible odds and won. "Mrs. Sawyer," Harrison said later that evening, holding Grace close as they swayed to music under the stars. "That's going to take getting used to," Grace admitted. "Though I'm keeping Keller professionally, Dr. Grace Keller has a nice ring to it. Whatever makes you happy." Harrison kissed her temple. "Thank you for not giving up on us, for fighting through all the family drama and doubt and obstacles. Thank you for loving me when it wasn't easy." "Thank you for making it worth fighting for," Grace replied. "Thank you for seeing me when your family couldn't. Thank you for being brave enough to choose your own path." "Our path," he corrected. "We walk it together from now on." 2 years later, Grace stood in the nursery of their new home, a compromise between the mansion and her tiny apartment, and watched Harrison rock their daughter to sleep. Catherine Lily Sawyer had her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination, making her feelings known loudly whenever she was displeased. "She's finally asleep," Harrison whispered, carefully placing the baby in her crib. "She's stubborn like her grandmother," Grace teased quietly. "Which one?" "Both of them." They tiptoed out of the nursery and collapsed on the couch together. Accessible medical solutions had launched successfully, providing affordable diagnostic tools to clinics across the country. Grace had been promoted to head of emergency services, using her position to implement better protocols and training. Their lives were full and chaotic and wonderful. "Your mom is coming for dinner tomorrow," Harrison mentioned. "Along with my parents, Helen might stop by too. The whole family." "Should I be worried?" "Nah, they all just want to spoil Catherine. We've created a monster. She's going to be so loved by everyone that she'll be insufferable." Harrison smiled. "I can't wait." Grace leaned against him, thinking about how far they'd come from that night in the hospital cafeteria, when she'd spilled coffee on a stranger. She'd never imagined that moment would lead to this. A family built on love instead of expectations, a marriage that grew stronger through challenges, a life full of purpose and joy. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked. "How I almost gave up." "When your parents were so against us, when everything felt impossible, I almost walked away. I was so scared of not being enough." "I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad we fought through the fear together." He kissed her softly. "You were always enough, Grace. More than enough. You were everything." "We were everything," she corrected. "We still are." They sat together in the quiet house, their daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, both sets of grandparents excitedly planning their next visit. Grace thought about her father, who hadn't lived to see her graduate nursing school or meet Harrison or hold his granddaughter. But she liked to think he'd be proud of the life she'd built, of the love she'd fought for, of the family she'd created. Love had proven everyone wrong. It had overcome family disapproval, bridged social divides, and built something beautiful from impossible circumstances. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every difficult moment. Harrison's company continued to grow, creating medical technology that actually helped people instead of just generating profit. Grace saved lives daily while mentoring young nurses and pushing for better emergency care standards. Together they raised Catherine with the same values both their mothers had instilled in them. Work hard, love deeply, and never let anyone tell you you're not good enough. On their 5th anniversary, they returned to the park where Harrison had proposed. Catherine toddled between them, holding both their hands, babbling happily about everything and nothing. 5 years, Grace marveled. Feels like forever and no time at all. Best 5 years of my life, Harrison said firmly. Every single day. Even the day Catherine projectile vomited on your best suit right before a major investor meeting. Okay, maybe not that day, but all the other days. He grinned at her over their daughter's head. Though watching you handle motherhood, a demanding career, and my family's continued enthusiasm with grace and humor, I fall more in love with you constantly. You're just saying that because I let you sleep in yesterday. I'm saying it because it's true. They found the exact spot where he'd proposed, marked by a tree they'd carved their initials into on their 1st anniversary. Catherine immediately became fascinated by the leaves on the ground, releasing their hands to investigate. Think we should tell our families about baby number 2 yet? Grace asked, watching their daughter play. Harrison's eyes went wide. Baby number 2, you're pregnant, as of this morning. I wanted to tell you first before everyone else gets involved and it becomes this whole production. Grace smiled at his shocked expression. Surprise. He pulled her close and kissed her deeply, their daughter making disgusted toddler noises at the display. Best surprise ever. How are you feeling? Do you need to sit down? Should we head home? I'm fine. I'm a medical professional, remember, I know what pregnancy requires. Grace laughed at his concern. Though you being overprotective is adorable, I'm allowed to be overprotective. You're carrying our child. Again. You're amazing. Harrison kept his arm around her waist as they walked, Catherine running ahead on sturdy legs. Boy or girl, what do you think? I don't care as long as they're healthy, though having one of each would be nice. Whatever happens, they're going to be loved beyond measure. By us, by both sets of grandparents, by Helen, who's already the most devoted aunt in existence. Harrison smiled. We've built something incredible, Grace. Not just our family, but the way we've brought both our families together. My parents have completely changed because of you. They changed because they loved you more than their pride. I just gave them a reason to examine their priorities. Always so modest, Harrison teased. They spent the afternoon in the park, the 3 of them soon to be 4, surrounded by evidence of changing seasons and enduring love. Grace watched Harrison chase Catherine around trees, both of them laughing with abandon, and felt profound gratitude for that night in the hospital cafeteria, for spilled coffee and unexpected connections, for a love that refused to be diminished by family disapproval or social expectations. She thought about all the people who doubted them. Catherine and Richard, who'd been so certain Grace wasn't suitable. Grace herself, who'd feared she wasn't enough. The society that saw wealth and status as requirements for belonging. They'd all been proven spectacularly wrong. Love didn't care about bank accounts or family trees or carefully constructed social circles. Love cared about late-night conversations and shared dreams and choosing each other daily, despite obstacles. Love was Harrison walking away from a company to find his true purpose. Love was Grace standing firm in the face of disapproval. Love was two families learning to become one. Love was Catherine giggling as her father tickled her, and the baby growing inside Grace, who would be welcomed with the same fierce devotion. "Come on," Harrison called, Catherine perched on his shoulders. "Let's go home and celebrate. Maybe we can convince Catherine to eat dinner without flinging food everywhere." "Unlikely, but we can try," Grace agreed, joining them. They walked back through the park as the sun set, a family built on love that had overcome every challenge thrown at it. Tomorrow, they would tell their families about the new baby. There would be tears and excitement, and probably Catherine and Richard fighting over who got to host the baby shower. Linda would start knitting immediately. Helen would begin planning elaborate aunt adventures, but tonight was just for them. Harrison, Grace, and Catherine, with baby number 2 their secret for a few more hours. A family that proved love could bridge any divide, overcome any obstacle, and build something beautiful from impossible circumstances. Grace had spent so much of her relationship with Harrison worried about not being enough, about her background or her profession or her lack of connections. But standing there with her husband and daughter, another child on the way, surrounded by family that had learned to love across differences, she finally understood what Harrison had been trying to tell her all along. She was enough. She had always been enough. And together, they were everything.